welcome back to Makeup and Murder. This is my series where I do my makeup while talking about true crime. I used to do it as I went and try to talk about it, but I can't give you the in-depth commentary and remember and do my makeup because I'm just not that talented apparently. And this is going to be a voiceover, and I'm going to have other people also commenting who are experts in the field. Let me know what you think of Makeup and Murder 2.0. Today we're going to be talking about the Ken and Barbie killers, Karla, Holmika, and Bernardo. We're going to get some insights from some people who know all about people like this, my insights, and the whole works, because on this channel, we're experts. Well, okay, I'm not an expert makeup artist, but if you want to see me create this look and want to hear some true crime while I'm doing it, keep watching.
There is very graphic content. Please don't watch if this bothers you. Karla Holmika was born May 4th, 1970. Karla's early life seems very normal. Family photos show a cute blonde-haired little girl with a bright smile. Her parents appear loving and have provided a stable, caring home life for Karla and her sisters, Lori and Tammy. Karla was asthmatic and hospitalized throughout her childhood. These attacks appeared to have been anxiety-related. Karla loved animals from an early age, and one anecdotal account has her racing to the aid of a beetle being tormented by a couple of boys, yelling, "You shouldn't kill it. You shouldn't kill anything." In high school, Karla was a bright, popular girl who worked at a veterinary clinic. Then, at 17, everything changed. She met Bernardo at a pet convention. Afterwards, they met at a restaurant and immediately went to her hotel room and had sex. Afterwards, they set about a fairy tale romance, or at least what appeared to be, with Paul showering her with gifts and driving to see her several times a week. Over the next year, they discovered they both had a thing for sadomasochism, with Paul in the role of master and Karla as the slave. At one point, Paul had Karla handcuffed on her knees, begging him for sex. He asked her if she would consider this rape. She said no. She thought it was cool. Before they met, Paul, a teenager, had started as a voyeur turned rapist. He was a well-known rapist, the Scarborough rapist. The police would have given anything to know about that. During their courtship, he stopped raping other women for periods of time, but, as always happens with this type of psychopathy, having a willing partner isn't enough. He resumed raping other women, albeit no longer in Scarborough. Now he was in St. Catherine. One big thing Paul held over Karla was she was not a virgin when they met, although odds are, if Karla had been completely innocent, she wouldn't have went along with Paul's perversions. After their engagement, Karla agreed to let Paul sexually assault her younger 15-year-old sister, Tammy. Their first attempt didn't work out. Tammy woke up very quickly, so over Christmas break, as a sadistic Christmas gift, Karla agreed to drug Tammy using stolen medication from her job at a veterinary clinic. That night, they gave Tammy a drink laced with drugs. Then, Paul raped her while Karla filmed the entire thing. Then, at Paul's bidding, Karla also raped her sister. All of this caught on film. They claim they didn't intend to kill Tammy, but Karla didn't know enough about the drugs she used, and they didn't watch Tammy closely enough. Tammy ended up choking to death on her own vomit. Karla was very jealous of Paul's attraction to Tammy. Paul would often have Karla dress up and pretend to be Tammy during sex. At the scene, there were several things that were out of place, like chemical burns on Tammy's face from where Karla was holding the rag over her nose and mouth. Paul and Karla quickly cleaned up the scene, vacuumed, dressed Tammy, then called 911. They acted their way out of the situation, and the event was written off as an accident. At this point, Karla said, he was so unique and so wild in bed, she would have done anything to keep his love, anything at all. Within a couple months, Karla and Paul moved in together. This is when Paul tells Karla he's a Scarborough rapist. He becomes violent towards Karla. Paul had started seeing another woman in Florida, and their engagement was on the rocks. June 7th, 1991. Karla brings home a 15-year-old girl, Jane Doe. She knows from a pet store. She spikes her drink. This was her wedding gift to Paul, a virgin. Paul rapes the unconscious girl while Karla videotapes it. Jane Doe has no idea that she had been drugged and raped. She thought she had simply drank too much that day, until the videotape was discovered. Karla's gift worked. Paul stopped seeing the other woman in Florida, and the wedding was back on. June 15th, 1991, 6 months later. 6 months after Tammy's death, and 2 weeks before their dream wedding, Paul kidnapped Leslie Mahaffey. She was just 14 years old and locked out of her house. She had missed curfew again after attending a friend's funeral. She ran into Paul while he was stalking the neighborhood. She asked if he had a cigarette. He said he did in the car. Once there, he attacked her with a knife, tied her up, and blindfolded her, then drove her to his home just 15 minutes away. Once there, he tells Karla they have a new playmate, and that he's planning to keep her as a sex slave. He gave explicit instructions on how Karla was to rape her. Then Paul started sadistically raping her. They spent the next day raping and torturing her. They videotaped the entire thing. On the tape, after a particularly violent episode of him sodomizing Leslie, she said, "Her blindfold is slipping." Is this the moment they decided she had to die? Karla claims Paul strangled her. Paul claims Karla overdosed her on drugs she had stolen from the vet clinic. They placed her body in the basement and had a dinner party upstairs with the Holmika family. The next day, Paul goes to a hardware store and buys a bunch of concrete. They dismember Leslie Mahaffey with a circular saw and case her dismembered corpse in concrete blocks. They then, over the next several days, dumped these concrete blocks into Lake Gibson. One block was over 200 pounds, and apparently they couldn't get it into the lake, and left it on the shore. This was later found by fishermen. June 29th, 1991, Paul and Karla's wedding day, is also the day they drag Lake Gibson looking for more body parts that are discovered to be Leslie Mahaffey. After this, Paul and Karla go about luring over Tammy's high school friends, drugging them, raping, and videotaping the event. During this time, Paul is also stalking the women of Niagara Falls region, all with Karla's full knowledge. April 16th, 1992, Paul and Karla go out for an afternoon drive, intent on finding a new sex slave. They spot Christian French walking through a church parking lot. They pull over, and Karla pulls out a map and asks Christian if she could show her directions. As Christian leans over to look at the map, Paul grabs her from behind and pulls her into the car, and they drive away with her. People see the event and turn it in, but they get the make of the car wrong. Over the next 3 days of Easter weekend, Karla and Paul raped and tortured Christian while videotaping the entire thing. They force her to drink large amounts of alcohol, but never blindfold her, which at trial the prosecution said showed they had always intended to kill Christian. They dismember her naked body and leave it in a ditch. Again, Karla says Paul murdered Christian by strangling her. But Paul says Karla killed her because she caught her trying to escape. Paul says Karla killed her by beating her with a rubber mallet and strangling her to death with a noose that was tied to a hope chest. Karla then went upstairs to fix her hair and get ready for Easter dinner with the Holmika family. Christian's nude, dismembered body was found in a ditch April 30th, 1992. During all this, a previous victim of Paul's had seen him while out shopping. She reported it to the police, but they didn't follow up, missing the opportunity to discover Christian while she was still being held hostage. During all this time, the police had Paul's DNA from the Scarborough rapist case. He was questioned over Christian's disappearance, but ultimately let go. Paul's own friends and family were turning him in to the police at this time because his resemblance to the Scarborough rapist photos was uncanny. In December 1992, the labs finally started testing the DNA from the Scarborough rapist cases. December 27, 1992, Paul beat Karla so badly with a flashlight he broke her ribs and left her a bruised, battered mess. This was it for Karla. She was fine with sadistic sex and the rape and murder of others, but being Paul's punching bag was out of bounds. January 4th, 1993, co-workers of Karla's thought they were rescuing her by physically removing her from the house. Karla kept going back in the house, frantically searching for something. Paul was arrested for the abuse, but released ROR. February 9th, 1993, the DNA results finally came back that revealed Paul was the Scarborough rapist. During this time, Karla admitted to her aunt and uncle she was living with that Paul was the Scarborough rapist and involved in the murders of Christian French and Leslie Mahaffey. She was placed under 24-hour-a-day surveillance. During this time, she was given Queen for a Day status. That meant she could confess to everything or nothing, and nothing could be held against her. At this time, they were unaware how involved she was in the rapes and murders. They offered her a deal, but not full immunity, but one that definitely gave her an advantage. On February 17th, the Metro Squad, using a limited search warrant, went into the home. In the VCR, they found a tape. On it, the couple were sexually assaulting Jane Doe. In the tape, Karla is performing oral sex on a drugged teenager. Karla claims Paul forced her and would beat her if she didn't do these things. After this, the attorneys for the Crown tell Karla she has 24 hours to accept the deal of 12 years, and she must fully testify against Paul. She accepts the deal. It's 3 months later that her full involvement is discovered with the discovery of the rest of the tapes. On them, Karla's not just standing around watching, but fully involved in every despicable act. They had made a deal with the devil. The attorneys for the Crown tried to get the plea deal overturned. It was denied. Karla ended up spending 15 years in prison for 3 murders and multiple rapes. After prison, she changed her name and moved to Barbados. Then, after her discovery there, she moved back to Canada, where she still lives with her 3 children. She has not been in trouble since. How did this happen? How did a bright, pretty 17-year-old girl turn into a psychopath? I think when she fell for Paul and discovered her own desire for sadism and lost all empathy, she just kept chasing that high people get from going further and further into the taboo. I don't think you can just dismiss the idea that Karla killed Paul's sex slaves, seeing him with these virgins, something she could never be. The jealousy was just too much, so she killed them. The way Paul describes Kristen's death leads me to believe Karla killed her. Once away from him, the spell was broken. Now that she's older and no longer as insecure and needing of his approval, it's less likely she would find sadism as appealing. Unfortunately, that doesn't absolve her of her guilt. What she did fully aware and willingly participated in these sexually brutal acts and murders, and that's not something normal people do. That seed is still inside her, and under the right circumstances, could easily flower again. I'm now going to be speaking to a couple of experts, Officer Lee, who has 22 years of law enforcement experience, and Kenneth, who is an up-and-coming forensic psychologist, about questions that some people have had regarding this case. Some of the questions are, what power did Karla have over Paul? What power did Paul have over Karla? Why were they dismembering the body parts? Do you think Karla will reoffend and should be allowed to have children? and why did they keep videos? We're going to start with Officer Lee. Officer Lee, why do you think they kept the videotapes?
Well, I think they kept the videotapes because statistically, people participating in psychopathic murders and crimes, they want to relive this crime over and over for the pleasure of the crime. They want to see it again. They relive it sexually. They relive it over and over again to bring this bond of sadistic sex to each other.
So, do you think that they had sex while watching these tapes?
I think that, yes, they generally had some of the best sex they probably had of their life while watching these tapes. They were reliving it. They were enjoying it. They were having fun.
So, do you think that they did that with the tape with the younger sister, Tammy?
They relived that over and over, both physically and on the tape. So, yes, I mean, that was probably his best moments. His best moments were with the younger sister.
Kenneth, what do you think they were thinking when they had the Holmika family over for dinner while Leslie Mahaffey's body was downstairs in the basement?
I think by that point they were feeling fairly invincible. They were coming down off a high after doing something they had been getting away with for a while now, so they didn't see that they had anything to worry about.
Do you think it made them feel even more powerful and more excited by doing that?
I think that it probably did, and the fact that they didn't get caught fueled that even more.
Who do you think had more power in this relationship? Do you think Paul had more power over Karla, or that Karla had more power over Paul? And how did that affect their relationship?
I think initially Paul had more control over Karla, and that she was enabling him sexually to do what he wanted and fulfill his fantasies. But I think as time went on, she took more charge in what was happening with the murders.
Do you think that's why he started physically beating her, is because he started to lose that power and control?
I think that is what happened. I think that he started to lose a lot of what he saw in himself when she started to take control of him. It was the opposite of the rape fantasy he was trying to fulfill.
So, Officer Lee, a big question a lot of people have is how come Paul Bernardo got away with this for so long? How come he wasn't caught when people were turning him in, including his own family members?
Well, one reason why he wasn't caught was this was a little while back in the 90s, and he spread his rapes and murders over a distance in different counties and jurisdictions. And by doing that, the jurisdictions weren't necessarily communicating. Although they were interviewing him, the information wasn't getting sent to one jurisdiction from the other, so he wasn't necessarily being sought as a suspect from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Secondly, one of the reasons why things were harder to catch him was this was a time in early DNA. When they took his DNA, it would have to be sent to just a few labs. These labs were overwhelmed. The DNA had to have a specific amount of DNA active on the sample to be able to be used, and it took up to 2 years to get a DNA sample back. So these DNA samples weren't being connected. Mr. Bernardo is a psychopath. Psychopaths are liked. They're loved. They have a good sense of humor. They have a good personality. They can talk their way out of anything. So when their family's even turning them in, he's going in, he's being helpful to the jurisdiction. He's being helpful to the police department. He's trying to give them what they want without him being a suspect. Even though he's being turned in by his families, they're not necessarily looking at him as a suspect, but they're looking at him as this charming young man who's good looking, who has got a personality, and a man that probably they don't feel at the time is capable of doing these acts.
Kenneth, why do you think they dismembered Leslie Mahaffey's and Christian French's bodies?
Well, I think an easy answer could be to help dispose of the body easier, but it goes further than that, because dismembering a body, it shows a very clear lack of remorse for the people that you are killing. It takes a lot to deface a body like that. I think that a lot of it was more thrilling for them to be doing that and just adding to the experience, because they ramped themselves up and devolved further the longer they went on.
Is that why with Leslie Mahaffey they encased her in cement blocks, but with Christian French they just tossed her in a ditch?
Yeah, it's it's just a lack of remorse and them further devolving as criminals.
Officer Lee, do you think Karla will reoffend? And there's a lot of discussion about whether or not she should be allowed to have custody of her children. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, as for custody of the children, I really don't know. But it is, in my opinion, a real strong possibility that she could reoffend. In the relationship she's in currently, it's possible that she probably won't offend, and she probably won't harm her children or any other. But if she does get into a relationship that is similar to hers and Mr. Bernardo's, it's possible that she would reoffend.
So this last question that I have is one that I think a lot of us really struggle with, and that is, do you think she should be out of prison at all?
She probably shouldn't be out of prison. I think the attorneys for the Crown realized that right away, that she probably needed to serve life in prison. They realized they made a mistake and that she probably should, although she has lived what appears to be a fairly straightforward life since she's been out of prison. The carnage that they created by killing and raping so many people, and she obviously had a more distinct part in the crime. She wasn't an innocent victim in this crime. I mean, she was equally culpable for the crime, and I believe that, yes, she should be in prison for the rest of her life.
So that is going to conclude the end of this edition of Makeup and Murder 2.0. Please comments below. Thank you.